The mailbox key felt cold and foreign in my palm as I stood in the lawyer's office, staring at the address written on the envelope. 37 Maple Ridge Road, a place I had never heard of in a town called Millbrook that might as well have been on another planet. The lawyer, William Young, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses as he explained that my great-aunt, Helen Wright, a woman I had never met, had left me her entire property. Her house, her land, everything. All I had to do was claim it. I was 19 years old and had been living in the state system since I was 7. Foster homes, group homes, and finally aging out with nothing but a duffel bag and a few $100s. The idea that someone, anyone, had thought of me enough to leave me something felt impossible. But here I was, holding the deed to 43 acres in a farmhouse that Helen Wright had called home for 62 years. The drive to Millbrook took 4 hours on a Greyhound bus, and with every mile that passed, the landscape changed from concrete and strip malls to rolling hills and farmland. I pressed my face against the window, watching cornfields stretch toward the horizon, trying to imagine what kind of life my great-aunt had lived out here. The lawyer had mentioned that she had been a teacher, that she had never married, and that she had specifically requested I inherit everything when she passed 6 months ago. 6 months. She had been gone for 6 months, and I was just now learning she had ever existed. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. I need to know there are people out there who understand what it feels like to discover family you never knew you had. The bus dropped me off at a small depot that looked like it had not been updated since 1950. Millbrook was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where pickup trucks outnumbered cars, and where the biggest building was the grain elevator that towered over Main Street like a concrete monument to agriculture. I shouldered my duffel bag and started walking toward Maple Ridge Road, following the directions William Young had written on the back of a business card. The house appeared through a grove of oak trees like something from a different century. 2 stories of white clapboard siding, a wraparound porch with hanging baskets that had long since withered, and windows that reflected the afternoon sun like sleepy eyes. The mailbox at the end of the gravel driveway read "Wright" in faded black letters, and I used the key the lawyer had given me to open it for the first time. Inside, I found 6 months of accumulated mail, mostly bills and advertisements, but also 3 letters addressed to me. My name, Joyce Wright, written in careful cursive on cream-colored envelopes. I sat on the porch steps and opened the first letter with shaking hands. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind that made a soft rustling sound when you unfolded it. The handwriting was the same careful script from the envelope. "My dear Joyce," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found your way home. I know you do not know me, and I regret that more than you can imagine. Your grandmother, my sister Patricia, and I had a falling out many years ago. Pride and stubbornness kept us apart, and when she passed, I lost my connection to you entirely. I have been searching for you for the past 5 years, ever since I learned you were in the system. By the time I found you, I was too sick to travel, too weak to be the family you deserved. But I can give you this place, this land that has been in our family for 4 generations. I can give you roots." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and continued reading. Helen had written about the farm, about the neighbors who would help me if I asked, about the apple orchard behind the house that produced the sweetest fruit in 3 counties. She wrote about the history of the land, how our great-great-grandfather had homesteaded here in 1887, how each generation had added something to make it better. The barn, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that still produced tomatoes and squash every summer. The second letter was more practical. Helen had left detailed instructions about the property, about which neighbors to trust, about the bank account she had established for property taxes and maintenance. She had thought of everything, planned for my arrival, even though she knew she would not be there to welcome me. The third letter was the shortest, but it hit me the hardest. "Joyce," it read, "you are not alone anymore. You have never been alone. This family, this land, these neighbors who will become your friends, we are all part of your story now. Do not be afraid to ask for help. Do not be afraid to stay. This is your home." I folded the letters carefully and slipped them into my jacket pocket, then used the house key to unlock the front door. The interior smelled like lavender and old wood, like a place where someone had lived fully and happily for decades. The furniture was simple but well made, the kind of pieces that last for generations. Family photos lined the mantelpiece above a stone fireplace, and I found myself staring at faces that looked familiar, even though I had never seen them before. There was my grandmother, Patricia, as a young woman, standing next to a man who must have been my grandfather. There were pictures of Helen at various ages, always smiling, often standing in front of the house or in the garden. The kitchen was spacious and bright, with windows that looked out over the backyard and the apple orchard beyond. Someone, probably a neighbor, had stocked the refrigerator with basics: milk, eggs, bread, sandwich meat. A note on the counter explained that Thomas Rogers from the farm next door had been looking after the place since Helen passed, making sure the utilities stayed on and the property was maintained. He had left his phone number and an invitation to call anytime I needed anything. I made myself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, looking through more of Helen's papers. She had been meticulous about record keeping. There were files for every aspect of the property: tax records, maintenance schedules, crop rotation plans for the fields she rented to local farmers. She had been making a living from this land, not a fortune, but enough to maintain the property and save money for my inheritance. The bank account she mentioned had $47,000 in it, more money than I had ever imagined having. As the sun began to set, I walked outside to explore the property. The barn was larger than it had looked from the house, with space for equipment and animals, though it was currently empty except for some old farming tools and a tractor that looked like it belonged in a museum. The apple orchard was exactly as Helen had described it: row after row of mature trees, heavy with fruit that would be ready for harvest in a few weeks. I picked an apple and bit into it, and the sweetness was like nothing I had ever tasted. That first night, I lay in Helen's bed in the master bedroom, staring at the ceiling and listening to sounds I had never heard before. No traffic, no sirens, no voices from neighboring apartments. Just the wind through the trees, the distant sound of cattle from Thomas Rogers' farm, and the settling noises of an old house. I should have felt lonely, but instead I felt something I had never experienced before: the possibility of belonging somewhere. The next morning, I was awakened by a knock on the front door. Thomas Rogers was exactly what I had expected a farmer to look like: weathered hands, sun-lined face, work boots that had seen decades of use. He was probably 60 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking that reminded me immediately of Helen's letters. "Thomas," he said, extending his hand, "I have been looking after this place for Helen. You must be Joyce." I shook his hand and invited him in for coffee. He declined but offered to show me around the property, to explain how everything worked. We spent the morning walking the fence lines, checking the water systems, discussing the practical aspects of maintaining 43 acres. Thomas explained that Helen had been renting most of the land to local farmers for corn and soybeans, that the income from those leases was enough to cover taxes and basic maintenance. He offered to continue managing those relationships if I wanted, to help me transition into rural life. The offer was generous, but I could tell Thomas was also evaluating me, trying to determine if I was serious about staying or if I would sell the property and disappear back to whatever city life I had come from. I understood his caution. Helen had been his neighbor and friend for decades. He had probably watched her decline, had maybe even helped her write those letters to me. He wanted to make sure her legacy was in good hands. Over the following weeks, I settled into a routine that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I woke with the sunrise, made coffee in Helen's kitchen, and spent my mornings learning about the property. Thomas introduced me to the other neighbors: Carl Lewis, who farmed the land to the east and had been renting Helen's back 40 for soybeans; Sarah Price, who ran a small organic vegetable operation and had been buying produce from Helen's garden for the farmer's market; Eugene White, who managed the grain elevator in town and had known Helen since they were children. Each of them welcomed me with a mixture of curiosity and cautious kindness. They had loved Helen, respected her, and they wanted to honor her memory by helping me succeed. But I could also sense their uncertainty. I was young, I was from the city, and I had no experience with rural life. They were willing to help, but they needed to see that I was committed to staying, that I would not abandon the land Helen had worked so hard to preserve. The apple harvest became my first real test. Helen had contracts with several local businesses to supply apples for buzz, cider, and direct sales. The trees were heavy with fruit, and Thomas explained that if I did not harvest them soon, I would lose the entire crop. He offered to help, to bring in workers from his farm, but I could see this was my opportunity to prove myself. I spent 3 days picking apples from dawn to dusk, filling crate after crate with the sweet fruit Helen had written about. My hands were raw, my back ached, and I had never felt more accomplished in my life. Sarah Price helped me deliver the apples to their various destinations, introducing me to the local business owners who had worked with Helen for years. Janet Kelly, who owned the bakery on Main Street, hugged me when she learned who I was and told me stories about Helen's generosity, how she had donated apples every year for the church's harvest festival, how she had quietly helped families in need by leaving boxes of produce on their doorsteps. As autumn progressed, I began to understand what Helen had meant about roots. Every day brought new discoveries about the property, about the family history I had never known, about the community that was slowly accepting me as one of their own. I found more letters hidden throughout the house, tucked into books and stored in drawers. Helen had been documenting family history, researching our genealogy, preserving stories that would have been lost forever if not for her dedication. I learned that our great-great-grandfather had been a Civil War veteran who had used his military pension to buy the original homestead, that our great-grandfather had been the first person in the county to grow hybrid corn, that my grandmother Patricia had been a talented musician who had played piano for the church until the day she moved away. Helen had preserved it all, photographs, documents, even sheet music that Patricia had written herself. But the most important discovery came in November, when I was cleaning out the attic and found a wooden chest filled with letters that Helen had never sent. They were addressed to me, dozens of them, written over the course of 5 years as she searched for me through the foster care system. Each letter documented her growing illness, her determination to find me, her frustration with bureaucracy and privacy laws that kept us apart. Reading those letters, I understood the depth of Helen's regret about the family feud that had separated us. She had written about Patricia, about the argument that had driven them apart when I was just a baby. It had been something trivial, a disagreement about their father's will, but pride and stubbornness had turned it into a permanent rift. Patricia had moved to the city, cut off all contact with Millbrook, and Helen had spent decades wondering about her sister's life, about whether Patricia had children, about what had become of our family. When Patricia died in a car accident, Helen had tried to find me, but the foster care system had been designed to protect children's privacy, not to reunite them with extended family members they had never met. It had taken her years of legal work and private investigators to track me down, and by then she was too sick to travel, too weak to be the guardian I needed. The guilt I felt reading those letters was overwhelming. While I had been aging out of the system, feeling abandoned and alone, Helen had been fighting to find me, spending her savings on lawyers and investigators, writing letter after letter that she could never send because she did not know where I was. We had both been alone when we could have been family. Winter in Millbrook was unlike anything I had experienced in the city. The snow fell softly and stayed clean, transforming the property into something magical. I learned to split wood for the fireplace, to check the water pipes for freezing, to appreciate the silence that came with rural isolation. Thomas continued to check on me regularly, and our relationship evolved from neighborly concern to genuine friendship. He taught me to drive the old tractor, to maintain the equipment, to plan for spring planting. The community slowly embraced me as well. I started attending the Methodist church where Helen had been a member for 60 years, not because I was particularly religious, but because it was where people gathered, where I could learn about local events and contribute to community projects. Patricia Collins, the church secretary, became a mentor of sorts, teaching me about local customs and introducing me to other young people in the area. Eugene White offered me a part-time job at the grain elevator during the winter months, helping with bookkeeping and customer service. The work was simple but steady, and it gave me a chance to meet more of the local farmers, to understand the agricultural economy that supported the entire community. I was no longer just Helen Wright's mysterious great niece from the city. I was Joyce, who worked at the elevator and made the best apple pie in 3 counties using Helen's recipe. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities. The farmers who had been renting Helen's land wanted to renew their contracts, but they also wanted to expand their operations. Carl Lewis proposed a partnership where I would take a more active role in farming decisions, learning the business while maintaining ownership of the land. It was an opportunity to honor Helen's legacy while building something of my own. I spent that spring learning about crop rotation, soil testing, and agricultural markets. Carl was a patient teacher, explaining the science behind farming, the economic factors that determine what to plant and when. I discovered that I had an aptitude for the business side of agriculture, for understanding market trends and managing contracts. Helen had left me more than just land. She had left me a foundation for building a life. The first crop I planted myself was a small vegetable garden, expanding on what Helen had started. I grew tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs, selling the surplus at the farmer's market alongside Sarah Price. It was satisfying work, watching seeds become plants, nurturing something from the ground up. I understood why Helen had loved this life, why she had fought so hard to preserve it for me. By my second summer in Millbrook, I had become part of the community in ways I had never imagined possible. I joined the volunteer fire department, helped organize the annual Harvest Festival, and served on the church board. People no longer saw me as an outsider. I was simply Joyce Wright, Helen's great niece who had come home to stay. The transformation was not just external. I had changed in fundamental ways, becoming more confident, more grounded, more connected to something larger than myself. The constant anxiety that had defined my life in the foster care system had been replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. I woke up each morning knowing where I belonged, knowing that I had work to do and people who depended on me. Thomas Rogers became like the grandfather I had never had, teaching me not just about farming, but about life in a small community. He explained the unwritten rules of rural society, the importance of keeping your word, of helping neighbors without being asked, of contributing to the common good. He told me stories about Helen, about her generosity and strength, about how she had been a pillar of the community for decades. The apple orchard continued to be my pride and joy. I expanded Helen's contracts, developed relationships with new customers, and even started making my own cider using equipment I found in the barn. The business grew slowly but steadily, providing enough income to supplement the land rental fees and my part-time work at the grain elevator. But the most meaningful change was internal. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I had roots, history, a connection to something that stretched back generations. When I walked through the apple orchard or sat on the front porch in the evening, I could feel the presence of all the family members who had lived here before me. I was no longer alone in the world. The second letter I found hidden in Helen's desk drawer was addressed to my future self, to be opened on the second anniversary of my arrival in Millbrook. In it, Helen wrote about her hopes for my future, about her belief that I would not just maintain the property, but make it thrive. She wrote about the importance of family, not just blood relations, but the chosen family of friends and neighbors who become your support system. She was right. The people of Millbrook had become my family in ways that biology could never have created. Thomas and his wife had me over for Sunday dinner every week. Sarah and I had become business partners, collaborating on farmers market sales and organic certification. Eugene had taught me to play chess during slow afternoons at the grain elevator. Patricia Collins had become like a mother to me, offering advice and support whenever I needed it. 3 years after arriving in Millbrook, I made the decision to expand the farming operation significantly. Carl Lewis was approaching retirement and offered to sell me his equipment and lease his land, effectively doubling the size of my agricultural enterprise. It was a big step, requiring a loan from the local bank and a commitment to farming as my primary career, but I felt ready for the challenge. The bank loan process was my first real test as a businesswoman. I had to present detailed financial projections, demonstrate my knowledge of agricultural markets, and convince the loan committee that a former foster child with no farming background could successfully manage a significant agricultural operation. Thomas and Carl both served as references, vouching for my work ethic and commitment to the community. When the loan was approved, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was unlike anything I had experienced before. I was not just surviving, I was thriving. I was building something substantial, something that would last beyond my own lifetime. I was continuing the legacy that Helen had started, honoring the family history that she had worked so hard to preserve. The expanded farming operation required me to hire help during planting and harvest seasons. I employed several local high school students, teaching them the same lessons that Thomas and Carl had taught me. It was satisfying to pass on knowledge, to be part of the community's economic ecosystem, to provide opportunities for young people who might otherwise leave for larger cities. Ryan Jones was one of those students, a 17-year-old whose family had struggled financially since his father's injury in a factory accident. Ryan was smart and hardworking, but he had been planning to skip college because his family could not afford tuition. I offered him a full-time position with the farming operation, with the understanding that I would help pay for his agricultural education at the state university. It was my way of paying forward the opportunities that Helen and the Millbrook community had given me. The apple orchard continued to be the heart of the operation, but I diversified into other crops as well. I planted a small vineyard, started a pick-your-own strawberry operation, and developed a community-supported agriculture program that provided fresh vegetables to families in town throughout the growing season. Each expansion felt like a natural evolution of Helen's original vision, a way of strengthening the connection between the land and the community. By my 5th year in Millbrook, the transformation was complete. I was no longer the scared 19-year-old who had stepped off the Greyhound bus with nothing but a duffel bag and a mailbox key. I was a successful farmer, a community leader, and most importantly, I was home. The Wright family farm had become a central part of Millbrook's agricultural economy, employing local workers and supplying fresh produce to restaurants and markets throughout the region. The house itself had been lovingly restored, with modern conveniences added while preserving its historical character. I had found family photos and documents that allowed me to recreate Helen's original decorating scheme, honoring her memory while making the space my own. The front porch had been rebuilt, the apple orchard expanded, and the barn converted into a modern processing facility for value-added products like cider, jams, and dried fruit. But the most important changes were not visible from the outside. I had built relationships that would last a lifetime, developed skills that would serve me well regardless of what the future brought, and most importantly, I had found my place in the world. The constant anxiety and uncertainty that had defined my childhood in the foster care system had been replaced by confidence and purpose. Thomas Rogers had become like family, and when his own health began to decline, I was able to return some of the kindness he had shown me. I helped manage his farm during his recovery from heart surgery, coordinating with his children who lived in other states to ensure he received the care he needed. It was my way of honoring the community values he had taught me, of being the kind of neighbor Helen would have been proud of. The relationships I had built extended beyond Millbrook as well. I had connected with other young farmers throughout the region, joining professional organizations, and attending conferences where I could share my experiences and learn from others who had chosen agriculture as their career. I discovered that my story was not unique, that many successful farmers had come to the profession from unexpected backgrounds, drawn by the same sense of purpose and connection to the land that had attracted me. The financial success of the operation allowed me to establish a scholarship fund in Helen's name, providing assistance to young people from foster care backgrounds who wanted to pursue agricultural education. It was a way of extending Helen's legacy beyond our own family, of ensuring that other young people would have the opportunities that had been given to me. 7 years after that first bus ride to Millbrook, I stood in the same apple orchard where I had picked my first harvest. But now I was not alone. Ryan Jones had graduated from agricultural college and returned to work as my farm manager. Sarah Price and I had formalized our business partnership, creating a cooperative there that served farmers throughout the county. The community that had welcomed me as a stranger had become my chosen family, and I had become part of theirs. The mailbox at the end of the driveway still read "Wright," but now it was filled with correspondence from customers, suppliers, and agricultural organizations. The mail that had once seemed so foreign and mysterious had become the routine communication of a thriving business and an active community member. I had kept every letter Helen had written to me, and I read them periodically to remind myself of the journey that had brought me here. The house was no longer quiet and empty. It was filled with the sounds of a life fully lived, business phone calls, dinner parties for neighbors, meetings of the agricultural cooperative I had helped establish. The kitchen where I had eaten my first lonely sandwich was now the heart of a home where friends gathered regularly, where holiday meals were shared, where the next generation of the Wright family story was being written. I had married Ryan Jones 2 years earlier in a ceremony held in the apple orchard with the entire community in attendance. Thomas Rogers had walked me down the aisle, and Patricia Collins had organized the reception. It was the kind of celebration Helen would have loved, bringing together all the people who had become my family over the years. Our first child was due in the spring, and I had already started planning how to teach them about the land, about the family history that Helen had worked so hard to preserve. The property itself had been expanded and improved, but always with respect for its history and character. The original farmhouse remained the centerpiece, but we had added a modern barn, expanded the processing facilities, and created a farm store where visitors could buy our products and learn about sustainable agriculture. The operation now employed 12 people full-time and provided seasonal work for dozens more, making it one of the largest employers in the county. But success had not changed the fundamental values that Helen had instilled in me through her letters and her example. The land was still farmed sustainably, with attention to soil health and environmental stewardship. The business was still deeply connected to the local community, supporting other farmers and contributing to regional food security. The profits were reinvested in the operation and the community rather than extracted for personal gain. Looking back on that scared 19-year-old who had opened Helen's mailbox for the first time, I am amazed by the journey that a simple key unlocked. That mailbox key was not just access to mail, it was the key to a life I never could have imagined, to a family I never knew existed, to a community that welcomed me home. Helen's final gift was not just the property or the money she had saved for me. It was the opportunity to discover who I could become when I had roots, when I belonged somewhere, when I was part of something larger than myself. She gave me the chance to build a life of purpose and meaning, to continue a family legacy that stretched back generations, to create something that would benefit not just me, but the entire community. The foster care system had taught me to be self-reliant, to expect disappointment, to protect myself from the pain of abandonment. But Millbrook and the Wright family farm taught me different lessons: the importance of community, the value of hard work, the satisfaction that comes from building something lasting. I learned that family is not just about blood relations, but about the people who choose to stand by you, who support your dreams, who celebrate your successes and help you through your failures. Today, when young people age out of the foster care system, I try to offer them some of the same opportunities that Helen gave me. Not everyone has a great aunt with a farm to inherit, but everyone deserves the chance to discover their potential, to find their place in the world, to build a life of meaning and purpose. The Scholarship Fund has grown into a broader program that provides mentorship, job training, and support services to young adults transitioning out of care. The mailbox key that seemed so mysterious that first day has become a symbol of possibility, of the unexpected ways that life can change when we are open to new experiences and willing to take risks. I keep it on my keychain as a reminder of where I came from and how far I have traveled, not just geographically, but emotionally and spiritually. As I write this, my daughter is playing in the same apple orchard where I learned to work with my hands, where I discovered the satisfaction of growing something from the earth. She will grow up knowing her family history, understanding the sacrifices that previous generations made to preserve this land, feeling the security that comes from knowing where you belong. She will never experience the uncertainty and loneliness that defined my childhood, but I hope she will understand the value of what we have built here. If you are watching this and you have your own story of unexpected family, of finding home in unlikely places, of discovering that you are not as alone as you thought, I want to hear from you. Share your experiences in the comments below. Tell us about the keys that unlocked new possibilities in your own life. Subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Stories about the power of family, community, and the courage to build something meaningful from whatever circumstances we are given. The Wright family farm continues to grow and thrive, but its greatest success is not measured in acres or profits. Its greatest success is in the proof that home is not just a place you are born into, but a place you can choose to build, with the help of people who become your family along the way. Helen Wright gave me more than land and money. She gave me the chance to discover that I was never really alone, that I had always been part of something larger than myself, that I had always been worthy of love and belonging. That mailbox key opened more than just a box for collecting mail. It opened a door to a life I never could have imagined, to a future filled with purpose and connection, to a home that will last for generations to come.